this year, we've chosen to focus on soil health, climate change again, and equipping the church to assist congregations and communities with a more just transition to a green energy future and repairing environmental harms. That being said, I want to express my heartfelt appreciation to those who contributed in any way, from providing feedback to assisting with editing, as well as the primary writers who will be introduced shortly, to walk us through the three overtures that we've developed over the past 4 to 5 months. Along the way, we've endeavored to consult as closely as possible with those servants of the church who work in various components of what we now call the Interim Unified Agency to resource the church for carrying out its mission. This list of online Zoom meetings includes representatives from a long list, and I've got a slide that lists those. If you can pull that up. Mission responsibility through investment, Advisory Committee on Social Witness Policy, Presbyterian Foundation, Board of Pensions, the budgeting people at the Interim Unified Agency, the Presbyterian Hunger Program, the Women and Gender, LGBTQIA plus racial equity, advocacy folks, Creation Action Network for Presbyterian Young Adults, Canopy, in partnership with us in developing these overtures, Office of Public Witness at the UN in DC, the Center for the Repair of Historic Harms, and the general PEC membership have all been involved with consulting with us on these overtures. And so these overtures went through a lot of changes from the beginning through the end. Amanda, you can bring up that next slide. So I want to introduce the four people who, three people and myself, who were the key writers on this process. Jim Turner, who worked on the overture on the importance of regenerative farming practices in caring for creation, led that process. Pam and Drew were really key in the changing course for a green future on the divestment of our denominational investments and Presbyterian investments in fossil fuels. And Pam helped me a great deal on working on the Green Future Endowment Fund that I will speak to in a few moments. So I'm going to just turn it over now to Jim to launch this introduction and presentation on the importance of regenerative farmative practices.
I am grateful that PEC members from various states helped write this overture. The new dietary guidelines this week give emphasis to the importance of nutrition, but the nutrition in food is affected by attributes of the soil that nurtured the green plants producing that food, and the guidelines do not even mention soil. Furthermore, worldwide deterioration of soil threatens the security of food supplies within a decade. Fortunately, modern science knows how farmers can regenerate soil, and there is some spreading awareness of that among farmers. But there are some upfront added costs for farmers who adopt practices that take better care of the soil. Recently, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced a $900 million program to assist farmers in better soil management, but that is not big enough to meet the need. And there are also concerns about how that will be allocated to large farms versus family-sized farms. Our society's awareness of the need for better farming practices can influence how the USA allocates this fund and can support the judgment of farmers who act wisely. A 2022 policy statement of ACSWP urged Presbyterians to lead toward better public awareness of readiness for coordinating more awareness of regenerative farming. And this overture aims to elaborate upon that duty and express a readiness for coordination of supportive learning and activity. This can be accomplished through voluntary activity of Presbyterians, supported by existing resources of the PCA and its staff, with few added costs. This overture is motivated partly by a need to counter the greenwashing efforts of large corporations that may aim to keep selling tractor fuel, chemical fertilizers, and pesticides, as well as nowadays genetically modified fungi and bacteria uh, to help farmers treat their soil. Some companies now even envision using cameras to spot an insect on a leaf and send a drone to spray a drop of insecticide on it. That would that would be thrifty with insecticides. That's not enough. But families on farms can gain better profits if they stick to regenerative practices such as those named in the overture. This can result in rural communities that are more populated by young people. The overture mentions managed grazing by animals because that produces revenues that help farmers to profit from regenerative practice. Uh, but this is an acceptance of grass-fed meat from grazing animals, but that stops far short of the dietary guidelines, implicit acceptance of meat from animals confined in feedlots. While some might want this overture to advocate abstinence from meat as a reduction of burden on farmland acres, to address that controversy would likely make this overture incapable of adoption and influence. Such advocacy can be considered for other occasions in the future as guided by the Holy Spirit. In general, this overture presents a positive view of how farm families will benefit from better practice and leaves it to individual Presbyterians whether or and how they will comment on economic and social problems that are involved in agriculture. I'm happy to take any questions later on.
Yes, we're going to do questions after we presented all of these overtures. So please hold on to your questions or put them in the in the on the side, the chats on the side. So now Drew Hill will tell us. We'll open up with the Ask section um, of the Changing Course overture.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm focusing on the recommendations, the actual policy of the Changing Course for a Green Future, continuation of the long-standing effort to encourage the denomination to divest from fossil fuels. Um, I want to focus what this recommendation actually does because it is very intentionally grounded in existing church policy. First of all, it does not introduce a new theology or new investment framework. It seeks to align our financial practices with commitments the church has already made repeatedly on creation care and climate justice. The overture also explicitly recognizes the progress already underway, commending both the Presbyterian Foundation and the Board of Pensions for reducing their exposure to fossil fuel companies. So it's not a rebuke of fiduciaries. It's really a recognition that the church is already moving in the right direction. Third and key, the overture operates fully within our fiduciary and divestment policies, affirms the church has already satisfied the requirements of the 1984 divestment strategy, which allows divestment from a class of firms as part of normal fund management and Christian witness. In other words, it applies our rules, not rewriting them. Um, the divestment itself, it calls for is phased and prudent, calling for companies whose primary business, more than 50% of their profit is in fossil fuels, and setting a goal of completion by 2030 or as prudent management allows. So it respects fiduciary discretion, market realities, and risk return standards, and is really measured and responsible. Um, Lastly, the recommendation does not abandon engagement. Rather, it directs MRTI and related advocacy bodies within the church to shift their leverage towards lenders, insurers, and public witness where engagement can be more effective at this stage. So divestment here is not a withdrawal, but really a strategic reorientation. Um, and this recommendation also places PCUSA within a clear ecumenical consensus, including the World Council of Churches and other bodies that have already divested. And so it strengthens our public witness and makes clear this is faithful and a mainstream response, not an outlier position. In short, this is a careful, faithful, fiduciary aligned, and overdue confession to consistency with the policies our church has already repeatedly affirmed. I'll pass it to Pam to give a little more on the rationale.
Hard to follow, Drew. Thank you very much. I'm going to explain the rationale, and I'm going to begin with a summary of what's in the rationale, and then I'm going to give you a few specifics. So the summary, we're asking the church to change and to be a leader in the global transition to renewable energy and to move away from our financial investments in polluting production and use of fossil fuels, because this more faithfully tracks with the reality of climate science, the guidance and policy of previous General Assemblies, and fulfills our witness to God's justice, care, and hope for creation. More specifically, our denomination has long affirmed that caring for creation is central to our discipleship and public witness, and this includes the needs to teach and to practice that which will meet the Genesis mandate to be caretakers of the earth. The 226th General Assembly in 2024 recommitted the denomination to the urgent need to align our programs with the global efforts to transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. And that's what we propose to do with this overture. This is critical because the science indicates that the world must make significant emission reductions by 2030 to avoid temperatures which will be catastrophic for all life. Further, the 226th General Assembly confessed our denomination's failure to take significant action to implement a restoring creation turnaround as called for in 1990. This overture seeks to bring the church's financial practices into alignment with the commitments we've already made. The denomination continues to maintain significant investments in fossil fuel companies. Our current engagement strategy has yielded limited improvement in corporate behavior related to the emissions from their operations, and does not address the larger problem that the products of this industry are destabilizing the global climate. Thus, our existing investment posture remains out of step with the theological commitments and moral direction repeatedly expressed by past General Assemblies. Our investments are contributing to the very harms that we claim we are trying to heal. We are calling for this to change.
I should unmute myself. Okay. Moving on to the third overture, which was actually an outgrowth of the work on the first overture around divestment, where we began to, insert points related to a just transition. As people of faith, we recognize that it's not only important that we deal with the root causes of climate change and climate disasters, but that we do so in such a way that we leave no one behind, that we keep all the world, that we help those who are least able to afford to make the energy transition to green energy, that we help those who are the most impacted by climate disasters, that we help people with adaptation, that we help people with loss and damage, that we are more available as the church and present as the church to help people who have suffered at the hands of the fossil fuel industry and those who have harm the environment. But we also must recognize that we are among the culprits to the extent that the history of our own investments in the fossil fuel industry have produced, profits for us, but in the process of producing profits for us, it has produced the products which have harmed the environment and harmed the world and have harmed those who are in the least positions of culpability for producing these fuels and even using them, especially when it comes to the developing world. So we need to do a better job as the church at addressing this. As we did our consultation, one of the things that came up in the consultation with the Canopy group of young adults was how many people in that group are involved with this land back effort for indigenous people to have land restored to them. Others have been involved with the ways in which the history of racism in this country and historic harms have excluded African Americans and other minorities from owning and operating farmlands. So we wanted to incorporate into this overture a way to address some of those harms and some of those historic wrongs. Finally, as we begin to do research on the ways in which we already have existing policy precedent, we found that back in 2008, the General Assembly adopted in that overture, among its recommendations, one recommendation that the Restoring Creation department of the church should establish a fund to help congregations make the green transition. This would be a fund that would help particularly small congregations and congregations in communities of color to be included in the transition in a just way. That fund was never established, or if it did, it didn't last. We've not found the people at the who are currently involved in the environmental ministries of the church are not aware of any such fund. There are loan funds available through the denomination, but there is no a grant fund available. So, what we're proposing in this overture is that a fund be established. And then in order to see that be actionable, implementable, we are offering the possibility of the creation of a planning team that would work, a design team that would work over the coming 2 years past the assembly and report back in 28 as to exactly how this fund will operate and be capitalized. And that is the way in which we seek to address this issue of a just transition, both for our churches, for the communities within the U.S., and potentially communities far-flung in those parts of the world where we now have withdrawn our commissioners, but are still seeking to be engaged with